thank you very much indeed for such a warm welcome. I hope that's coming across to you. I don't know what thank you is in Korean. I wish I did. But thank you and congratulations on getting this fantastic conference together today. Thank you very much. Give yourself a round of applause. So, my talk today is called Changing Faces, Facing Changes. And the reason I called it this was because, like all of you here today, I suspect, I never expected to get burned. I never expected to have to change my face, change the way I faced the world. This is what happened to me. I'm going to tell you my personal story, and then I'm going to tell you a bit about the work that I've done with Changing Faces over the last 25 years. And I hope that there will be time to take questions at the end. Next slide, please. Oh, whoa. One. So, this is what I look like as an 18-year-old, and I must say I traded on my looks. I liked what I looked like, and I thought that this was going to be very important for me in the future. Next slide. However, I was then involved in a car fire, and 3 months later, I looked at this in the mirror, and it didn't look like me at all. It didn't look like me, it didn't feel like me, and although my eyes were the same, what I looked at just definitely didn't seem to be me. I then went through, over the next 5 years, and this is in the 1970s, so a long time ago, but I went through some plastic surgery operations. You excuse the hairstyle, please. But you can see that I gained a top lip and a cover for my nose and some big surgery around my eyes. Very painful. Next slide, please. And then I had what was then in those days a really radical piece of surgery involving a pedicle flap. So microsurgery was not available in those days, and so this was the way in which a large area of skin could be moved from another part of my body to my chin. It took many, many months and was full of risk. Next slide, please. But in the end, after 10 months, this was the result. Good work, eh? The surgery was brilliant. But, capital letters, but, showing my face outside the hospital was agony. It was agony from the first day. It was still agony 5 years later. But I started to discover some ways in which I could handle it. Next slide, please. At the beginning, it felt as if I was in the wilderness. There was no guide available, no maps, no advice. The only advice that I came across was in a book which had been written by an American sociologist in 1963, about 8 years before my accident by Irving Goffman. It's still in print in the UK. Stigma, Notes on the Management of Spoiled Identity. It was a revolutionary book for me in some ways because it told me that I was not alone. But its advice for how to come to terms with what I was doing was non-existent. It was not very positive. It suggested that I was a stigmatized individual because of my face, and I would always be that. I resisted those conclusions with every ounce of my being, in my gut, in my head, in my heart, everywhere. But it was not easy. It took me something like 7 years before I could honestly say that I was through it. I went to see my surgeon and said, "Thank you for all the surgery, but I'm now wanting to be a citizen and not a patient anymore." And so I started out on another journey. I got a job, a good job, a meaningful job. I fell in love. What? Yes, I fell in love. I got married, I had children, I got a business together. Next slide, please. And here is my scene in the 1990s. Well, really the 1980s and 90s. I was a dairy farmer. I had some fabulous pigs, and I had little children. I was living life to the full. It felt good and very unexpected. And I always wanted to write something that would say, these are the lessons that I'd learned. And then a chance came. Next slide, please. In Britain, in the late 1980s, there were 3 enormous national fires. The one at the top left was the Bradford City football stand. Many, many people were injured in that fire, and many died. The second was the Piper Alpha oil rig, which exploded. Many, many injured again. And lastly, in 1987, the King's Cross Underground fire at the King's Cross station in London. Again, hundreds of injured people and many deaths. And it was from those 3 disasters that I got an invitation from Penguin Books to write a book. Wow, what? Yes, to write a book about the lessons that I'd learned that I could pass on to burn survivors of these accidents and many other causes. And so I wrote this book. Yes, this book. I brought 8 copies, and I'm giving them away. I wrote this book as an effort to pass on not just to burn survivors, but to anybody who has a facial or other disfigurement, from cleft lip and palate or facial cancer, from facial paralysis, anything that makes your face look different. And I thought, that's great. Next slide, please. And then I met somebody, quite by accident, on a TV show. You can perhaps see the TV show there. And I'd never come across this woman, and she'd written a book called The Social Psychology of Facial Appearance. Her name was Nicola Rumsey. She was teaching nurses, psychology at the time, but she had done a PhD in facial disfigurement. And she was invited to review my book. That's an earlier copy of it, incidentally, with a very young James Partridge on the front. And she reviewed my book on this television program in the most extraordinary way, because I thought she was going to tear it apart, literally skim it and say, this is nothing relevant here. Because I had not read her PhD. I hadn't read any of the references in the 30 pages of references in this book. I hadn't read any of them. But she said, the good news is that what you've written in this book and what I've done in my research has reached exactly the same conclusions. Thank goodness. And so we started to talk. And afterwards, after the TV show was finished, I started reading all her research. She said, what are you going to do next? I said I had to go and milk the cows, which was true. But it was a meeting of very great significance for me, because she had agreed with 3 important things that I believed mattered. Next slide, please. Ooh, what does this say? Oh, yes. She agreed 3 important insights from her research and from my personal experience. The first was that the psychological and social impact of living with burns was very, very similar to that experienced by people living with cleft lips or birthmarks or facial paralysis or acne or psoriasis or many, many other facial conditions. Next slide, please. Which meant that all these people, and these are friends of mine in Britain, a man who has a cleft lip and palate, a woman who has facial cancer, a girl with a very big birthmark, a woman with a very rare congenital condition called cherubism, a woman with the most wonderful birthmark on her face, a woman who was attacked with acid in Britain, a woman who has facial cancer, or a man with acne. All of these people, and many, many, many more, have very similar psychological and social experiences in facing the public. Next slide, please. The second insight was that most of these people, not all, but most of them, are vulnerable to 3 problems. Firstly, of low self-esteem. Having facial scarring or some other visible disfigurement in our look perfect culture is very difficult. It's very difficult to feel excuse me to feel good about yourself. Secondly, most people experience a loss of self-confidence. We know, and I knew, that there were enormous difficulties in every single social encounter that I had. On the street, in public transport, wherever I was vulnerable to staring, to comments, to questions, And if you were a young person in the school playground, it was not pleasant. Strangers, getting work, all of these things were complicated. And thirdly, the third problem was how to negotiate the surgery and medicine that you're going to go through. So many questions, so little guidance, how to decide whether to have more surgery or not. Difficult questions. All of these are a burden, a set of problems that all of us have been through. Next slide, please. There's a very famous quotation from an American social anthropologist, and I apologize for its length, but it says what this experience is all about. We are vulnerable to visual and verbal assaults and a level of familiarity from strangers not otherwise dared. She was writing in 1990, and if we add today the impact of social media, this is, I'm afraid, the reality for many people. Staring, startled reactions, double takes, whispering remarks, curiosity, ridicule, awkwardness, a sense of awkwardness, and sometimes avoidance from people we meet. They often don't mean any harm. They just don't know what else to do. Francis Cook McGregor summed it up by saying that people experience a loss of civil inattention that most people take for granted, a loss of civil inattention. In other words, if you enter the room, if you get on the public transport, people look at you. They might not know they're doing it even, but they look, they stare, and you can feel that. This is an uncomfortable reality for most of us. Next slide, please. So I decided, having met Nicola Rumsey, that I would do something about it, that I would create a charity that was designed to try to raise up what you could call the psychosocial help available. And we did that from 1992 through to today. Changing Faces is doing it. And you can go on the website. I'm sorry, the website isn't named here. changingfaces.org.uk. Next slide, please. We discovered over the years that there were 5 principles that really do make it easier for people to adjust successfully. And the 5 principles, I'm just going to go through them quickly, are the following. I'm sorry, could we just go back one slide? I think I may have missed a slide. No? Keep going. Okay. No, keep going. No, sorry, forward. And more? No. The other way. Go on. One back. Okay. So, there was a slide that I didn't put in, obviously, but the third insight that Nicola Rumsey and I came to was that there were 5 principles which we worked on over the next 20 years that were fundamental to successful adjustment. Let me go through each. The first is finding out about your treatment. Find out as much as you possibly can about it. Become an absolute expert. Ask the very difficult questions. Don't be afraid to challenge your consultants, your specialists. They may be a little bit annoyed, but they will be pleased in the end. And the reason for this is that you become the expert. You are no longer being done to. You are part of the process. You are in control. And you can explain it to other people too. Oh, I'm having some more surgery next week, next year, and it will do ... So find out as much as you can, become an expert. Whoa. Go back, please. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Oh, no. That, yeah. The second is get attitude. This is not easy to do. Becoming positive about your experience is not going to happen just like that. But if you meet people who are successfully surviving and thriving, this will help you. Social media is now a fantastic place for sharing stories, for finding people who are battling as they have, but they can become and have become positive. So get positive if you can. Thirdly, it's absolutely okay and normal to feel sad or angry or any other emotion. It's normal. And it's important that if you feel low, that you seek help. Don't wallow in feeling low. Go and see somebody, ask their help. At Changing Faces, we employed a team of people that are specialists in listening and providing the kind of support that people need. It's normal. Fourth, E is for exchanging. Be willing to come to conferences like this. This is a fantastic gathering, like the World Burn Congress, a fantastic gathering where people exchange their experiences. You will find people here who are wearing the same t-shirt. This is a very good way of raising your own confidence and ability to deal with the future. And lastly, perhaps most importantly, learn the social skills to manage other people's reactions. Next slide, please. And we did a lot of work on this, and I'm not going to go through this entire slide. Quite a lot of the ideas are in this book. They're also on the Changing Faces website. But these are some of the strategies that we recommend. And in English, this toolkit is called Reach Out. It's an acronym, Reach Out. And it's deliberately reaching out because it's, in our view, the most important thing for people with disfigurements to do is to take the initiative. It sounds impossibly difficult, and why should you have to do this? But if you don't, the chances are that you will find social encounters difficult. So these are some of the tactics that we recommend that you use to take the initiative. I'm just going to speak about 3 of them here. 1, maybe 4. 1, the R is for reassurance. To give reassurance to other people doesn't mean that you have to give them the full explanation of what happened to you. You don't have to explain to the whole carriage of the public transport train, I was involved in a fire, No. You can give reassurance to people very simply by being upright and looking confident, even if you don't feel confident, to show that you are in control of yourself gives reassurance. And of course, if people ask you what happened, you can give them some answers. You don't have to give them the full answer. I think one of the easy ways to explain this in Britain is that if I pull my tie across a bit like this, in Britain, this indicates this man is not okay. It indicates that I haven't really paid attention to how I present myself. If I'm like this, smart, and people get a message that you don't have to speak. You can just give them the message. So that's one. Reassurance, incredibly important. Second, eye contact. Nobody told me when I left the plastic surgery ward or the burns unit to use eye contact when I meet people. It is the most important skill perhaps I know. If you can use eye contact effectively, people get so many messages quickly. But if you don't use eye contact, they also get lots of messages because it's obvious that you're not really glad to be with them. Did you get that? Did you get that feeling of uncomfortableness then? It's very quick. So remember, eye contact. The third skill that we teach, and you cannot have it in too small quantity, is assertiveness. You have to be willing sometimes to challenge people who are rude to you or are overstaring, and there are ways of doing this, assertiveness. And I won't go into that in great detail, but do ask questions. The other skill I just wanted to mention was O for over there. It is amazing how you, I mean every one of you, has the capacity to change the conversation. You are able to ask people that you meet questions about themselves that will get them to start talking about themselves, and thereby, and you must follow it up, and thereby their anxiety, awkwardness about you goes away very quickly. So if you use in Britain what we would call the 5 W's and an H as starter words in conversation, where are you going this afternoon? What's the score in the match? How did your university turn out? I can't think of the other ones. Anyway, there are 5 W's: who, what, why, where, and when, and 1 H, how. These are very important ways of starting open-ended conversations. They transfer over to the other person, taking the attention off you. Skills, practice, that's what it takes. Next slide, please. So, in conclusion, briefly, I'm sorry not to come with a magic solution today. There are no magic solutions to adjusting to having facial or other burns. It's an everyday challenge. But, you're not alone. There are lots and lots of people who are in the same boat with you. Many fellow travelers and positive role models. Use them, find them, hear them, listen to them, get the vibes, because you're not alone. It's also really important that if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling low, get help. Don't hold off. Get it, because it can be very, very helpful. And lastly, if you can learn the skills to manage other people's reactions, you will feel so much more in control. I know that the Phoenix Society and Barbara Camara-Quayle here has got very similar programs to what we invented at Changing Faces, and I'm not suggesting that ours are any more effective than yours. The most important thing is that they are coming to the same conclusions. You can be in control of your destiny if you wish to be. So, I hope that's of value. I'm very happy, next slide please, to take any questions. Thank you very much.